She called her husband 17 times while in labor. He never answered, and her final message silenced the world. I own a $10 billion empire, and this child will not carry your name. That night, a woman turned her pain into power, and the man had to lose everything to finally learn how to love. If you've ever believed women are fragile, this story will make you think again. Hit like, subscribe, and join me on the journey of a woman who dared to become the fire to find herself again. People do not arrange meetings, but by the wind and fate. That afternoon, in the scorching Nevada desert, where the sun poured over cracked earth and dust spun into faint whirlwinds at the horizon, Brian Wilson saw Harriet Chemsley for the first time. He didn't know he was looking at the woman who would change his life. He only saw a figure walking against the wind, long hair sunburned into shades of copper, and eyes that held no fear. She walked straight into the big tent, where Wilson Global's investors discussed plans to build a luxury resort on land sacred to the Paiute tribe. Brian sat at the head of the table, white shirt, sunglasses, the silver face of his Patek glinting in the reflected light. He was used to meetings where everyone stayed silent when he spoke, but Harriet was not the quiet type. She pushed through the tent flap, her voice cutting through the air before anyone could react. Stop. Heads turned. A dusty young woman in hiking boots crusted with sand, 2 cameras swinging from her neck, stood among them like a small storm. Who are you? The financial advisor snapped. Harriet's eyes swept the room, calm and cold. The only person here who knows what you're doing wrong. Brian tilted his head slightly. He was about to speak, but she continued. You're talking about crushing this land to build a resort for people who'll take a few pictures and call it a cultural experience. You'll destroy the place where they worship, where they come of age, where the wind still carries their ancestors' memories. You call that development. I call it erasure. The tent fell silent. One engineer opened his laptop and protested. We have permits. We're compensating them. Harriet laughed, sharp and unsweet. Compensating? You can't pay anyone for their history. Brian raised a hand to quiet his team. He stood and strolled around the table, eyes fixed on her. The wind caught his shirt, his hair slightly tousled. Who are you? Harriet Chemsley, independent photographer. I'm documenting the Paiute people for National Geographic. I've lived with them for 6 months. They don't need a resort. They need respect. We're just trying to create jobs. Jobs for how long? Until you move on to the next place to destroy. You build, you leave, and they lose everything. Brian didn't argue. He just looked at her, the steady voice, the way she stood tall among men in suits. If I want to make it right, will you help me? She arched a brow. You don't want to make it right. You want to make it profitable. They're not the same. Then show me the difference. Why should I? Because I'm asking you to. Something in his gaze made her pause, curiosity, challenge, or maybe the strange sense that he was genuinely listening. Finally, she nodded. One day, stay in the village. If after seeing them, hearing them, you still want to build, then I won't stop you. That afternoon, Brian shed his suit and put on the rough cotton shirt she gave him. They walked together through red, dry earth and wind-carved stones. Harriet spoke little, mostly silent, occasionally pointing to sacred markers or burial grounds. By sunset, they reached the village. Children ran out laughing, the air filled with smoke, grilled meat, and mint tea. An older man handed Brian a cup, his wrinkled fingers closing over Brian's hand. No translation was needed, Brian understood. This was not a place to sell tickets. When night came, Harriet sat on the sand, camera in hand, staring into the distance. What will you do now? Brian looked up from his cup, the firelight flickering in his eyes. I'll cancel the project. She turned to him, surprised. You're serious? After today, I can't do otherwise. I'll remember their faces every time I think of building something. She was silent for a moment, then smiled, her first smile of the day. Maybe you're not like other men, and maybe you're the only woman who's ever made me see the world differently. Outside, the desert wind carried the song of someone far away. They sat side by side, 2 strangers in the dark, with only the heartbeat of the desert between them. The next morning, sunlight poured over the dunes, stretching gold to the horizon. Brian woke early and saw Harriet photographing a child, her hair glowing in the morning light. He stood still, watching. There was something in how she held her camera. He realized she wasn't capturing images. She was capturing souls. You've never seen light like this before, have you? She asked without turning. No, he said softly. "But now I understand why you said this place deserves to be saved." She lowered her camera, her eyes gentler. "Most people see land. I see memory. Every grain of sand here has a story. And me, I've only ever seen numbers." "What do you see now?" He hesitated. "You." The air stilled for a heartbeat. Harriet laughed, quietly but without sarcasm. "You talk like someone who's never been rejected. And you talk like someone who doesn't trust anyone anymore. Maybe we're both right." They left the village that afternoon. On the drive back, Brian called his team. His voice was steady. "Cancel the Nevada project. Protect the land. Help the Paiute community develop local tourism. No one touches it." The line went silent. No one had ever heard Brian Wilson personally kill a multi-million-dollar project, but he did not explain. Harriet glanced at him. "You just lost a lot of money. Some things are worth more than money." "Like what?" "The feeling of being able to sleep without explaining myself." Before she left, Harriet handed him a photograph that evening, a laughing child beneath a violet sky. "Keep it. To remember the day you did the right thing. What should I give you in return?" "Nothing. Just keep your word." "You don't trust me?" "Trust takes time." Her jeep disappeared into the dust. Brian stood alone in the desert, the wind brushing his shirt, the last sunlight burning gold in his eyes. He knew he had lost a contract, but found something no money could buy. Weeks later in New York meetings, headlines, shareholders' anger. Brian stayed silent. There weren't numbers or losses in his mind, but Harriet's face. He sent her an email. "No business talk, just one line. I've never seen light like that day. Thank you for teaching me how to see differently." She didn't reply. 3 weeks. 4. He began to think she never would. Until one night, his inbox lit up. "If you want to learn how to see, come to Bali. I'm here shooting. But this time, there's no land for you to cancel. Only time if you dare to spend it." Brian smiled. He booked a ticket that very night. Outside his window, New York blazed with light. But all he could remember was the light of the desert, where sand met wind, and a woman taught a billionaire how to listen for the first time in his life. Some loves don't begin with a confession, but with a journey. For Harriet and Brian, everything continued through flights, lands, and chance meetings that refused to fade. After the desert, Harriet's emails became the fragile thread connecting two worlds that shouldn't have been able to touch: one man accustomed to glass-walled boardrooms in Manhattan, and one woman living in clay huts across Kenya or the South American rainforest. Yet despite their differences, they shared the same passion: people and their stories. In Bali, where sunlight shattered into 1,000 fragments on the water, Harriet led him through narrow alleys where artisans carved wooden statues by firelight, where children played among the scent of plumeria and salt. Brian, the man who once thought travel was a luxury status, learned to sit cross-legged on the ground, listen to the rhythmic tap of a craftsman's chisel, and breathe in the smell of fresh wood. Harriet smiled. "You sure you can handle a life without Wi-Fi or air conditioning?" He replied softly, "If you're here, I think I can." She shook her head and walked ahead, but he caught the faintest smile tugging at her lips. From Bali, they went to South America, then Africa. Harriet was always herself, at times quiet and unreadable, at others fierce and blazing like noon on the savannah. And Brian, the man who once only signed contracts and gave orders, now stood barefoot on a Patagonian beach, pants rolled to his knees, chasing after Harriet as she ran along the shore with her camera. "If you're going to photograph me, let me smile properly. Natural smiles look better. I haven't learned that." "Then learn." And he did. He learned to laugh in the rain, stay silent when she told him about the people she'd met, and let his hands rest without reaching for his phone. One night, they sat by the Amazon River, the air pulsing with frogs and insects. Harriet asked, "Do you ever get scared? Scared of losing everything because of one emotional decision, like canceling the Nevada project?" Brian stared into the dark water. "I used to. Not anymore. Losing something made me see what really matters." "And what's that?" "What I'm looking at right now." She didn't look at him, but she knew his eyes were on her, and for the first time in years, her heart trembled. They reached Paris in October, when golden leaves blanketed the boulevards. Harriet hosted a small photography exhibit titled "Places We Never Understood." Her photos from Africa to the Americas revealed the quiet beauty of forgotten lands. Brian came, standing silently at the back. When the crowd thinned, he approached her and placed a small box on the table. "This isn't a ring," he said. "It's a plane ticket. One to anywhere you choose. Not for work, not for a project. Your choice, and I'll go with you." Inside the box was a blank ticket, no destination, no name. She looked at him, her eyes softer now. "And if I say no, then I'll still go. But I'll always leave the seat beside me empty." That night, they walked along the Seine. The lights shimmered across the water. Brian took her hand for the first time, no words, no need for them. Harriet didn't pull away. It wasn't a proposal, but the most beautiful promise she'd ever received. Months later, they married on Santorini, just the two of them, the wind, the sea, and locals who brought flowers for a blessing. Harriet was barefoot on white stone, her dress simple, flowers in her hair. Brian looked at her and forgot to breathe. When the priest asked, "Do you promise to love her, even when she doesn't need you?" Brian answered, "I promise to learn to love her how she wants to be loved." Eleanor Wilson, his mother, didn't come. She sent a telegram instead. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. A woman like her will burn everything down." Brian smiled, read it aloud to Harriet. She said only, "Then let's make the world burn brighter." And they kissed under the sun, the wind carrying their laughter across the blue Aegean Sea. Their early years were golden. Harriet left her international photography work to join Brian in creating the first sustainable luxury projects resorts that partnered with local communities instead of replacing them. She designed, he financed. She captured images, he promoted. Together, they became the golden couple of ethical luxury. They lived in a villa by the Malibu coast. Every morning, Harriet brewed coffee and opened the windows to the sea breeze. Brian worked on the balcony, laptop beside him, while she spread photos across the table. "Do you see it?" she'd ask. "The light here changes every minute like the sun is telling stories in color." "You're right," he'd smile. "But I don't know how to listen." "Then learn." She'd laugh again. But love, like fire, shines brightest when the wind comes to test it. Eleanor never stopped interfering. She sent long, veiled emails from New York. Don't let her drag you into her non-profit ideals. Business needs realism, not morality. Brian deleted them, but her voice echoed in his mind at night. Meanwhile, Harriet began to feel the weight of the Wilson name. Investors expected her to smile more softly, dress differently, and speak less. One day, she told Brian, "You know what's the worst thing about being your wife?" "What?" "When I walk into a room, people think I'm allowed to be there because of your last name." He said nothing. She didn't need an apology, only understanding. But he could only kiss her forehead and whisper, "You matter more than they think, Harriet." "No, Brian. I matter more than they believe. You need to see it too." Time passed. Projects grew. Brian traveled more. Harriet stayed behind, running the creative side. She started worrying when he came home late, when Mom called at midnight. He still loved her, but from farther and farther away. Their dinners grew quieter. One night, she stood on the terrace watching the dark ocean. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. "Do you know what I'm afraid of?" he asked. "No. I'm afraid I can't keep it all, you. The company, the vision, my mother, the investors." "Then stop keeping. Choose what's worth keeping." "I can't. Then you'll lose." And she was right. Harriet got pregnant a few months later. Brian was overjoyed. Eleanor saw it as a distraction that could slow the company's growth. She called non-stop, pushing Brian to attend meetings instead of staying home. Harriet said nothing. She still photographed, still smiled, but the light in her eyes began to fade. As her belly grew, Brian missed the parenting classes, the ultrasound, even the first time the baby kicked. She smiled when he came home late, reheated dinner, and said, "It's okay." But at night, when he slept, she sat alone, hand on her stomach, whispering, "Daddy's busy, sweetheart." "But Mommy's here." She prepared a small dinner on their second anniversary, candles, jazz, and his favorite meal. She wore the white dress he once said looked like morning light. When he walked in, phone to his ear, Eleanor's voice echoed, "Don't miss the Singapore deal. 300 million, Brian. Don't let feelings interfere." Harriet stood still, one hand on the table. "Do you remember what today is?" He blinked. Then realization hit. "God, Harriet, I'm sorry. But this trip, 3 days, right? Just 3. I promise I'll make it up to you. You said that last time, and the time before. This is business. And what are we? Not business? He glanced toward the door at the packed suitcase waiting there. Harriet understood. She smiled, calm and cold. Go, Brian. Build your empire, and I'll build something else. When the door closed, she blew out the candles and stood in the dark. Her reflection stared back in the mirror, a pregnant woman, standing alone in fading light. She whispered, I'll show you. Love isn't the only thing that can build an empire. That night, the Malibu wind blew salt and chill through the open window. Harriet placed her hand on her belly. Sleep, Isabella. Mama will build a world where you never have to ask for permission to be loved. There's a strange truth about marriage. The very things that make us fall in love with someone are sometimes what make us lose them. Harriet loved Brian for his vision, strength, and power to make everything he touched shine. But that same ambition unchecked began to burn everything around him. After the missed anniversary, Harriet stopped trying. She no longer waited for him to come home early or called to ask where he was. Instead, she buried herself in work, running the sustainable travel project in Costa Rica, the one they had once designed together. She appeared on magazine covers and was praised as the creative soul of Wilson Global. But deep down, she knew she was slowly being pushed out of the world she helped build. Eleanor Wilson saw her chance. She summoned Harriet to the New York office, 49th floor, the city glimmering below. Harriet, you're a smart girl, Eleanor began, her voice smooth as honey. But Wilson Global isn't built on feelings. You should rest and focus on being a mother. Men like Brian need someone to keep the home, not someone to argue with them. Harriet met haar gaze. Are you worried about him, or about your company? Eleanor smiled faintly. They're the same thing. No, Mrs. Wilson. I worry about him. You worry about your power. Eleanor tightened her grip on the coffee cup, her expression unchanging. You don't understand men, Harriet. They love you for your strength and leave you for the same reason. Harriet stood, calm and poised. Maybe you're right, but at least I'm not raising a daughter to live in fear. The door closed behind her, the echo of her heels cutting through the marble silence. Brian knew nothing of the confrontation. He was in Tokyo, signing Wilson Global's biggest deal yet. Harriet texted, Your mother just fired my entire Costa Rica team. Reason, incompetence. He read it, typed back, I'll talk to her, don't worry. Her reply came fast. I'm not worried. I'm just disappointed. She was 6 months pregnant, her body heavy, her mind sharp. Sometimes she wondered if she'd been wrong to believe love could coexist with power. One evening, alone in their Malibu home, she heard Brian's voice on TV during an interview. Wilson Global is expanding into Asia. Our goal is 10 billion in revenue. Not a word about Harriet. Not a word about the child she carried. That night, she sat on the porch as the ocean wind howled. She opened her old notebook and wrote, They say love is fire. But if no one stays to tend it, fire turns to ash. She closed her eyes, hand on her belly. Don't be afraid, Isabella. I won't let you be born into this silence. You'll know love is real even if your father forgets it. When Brian finally came home after 2 weeks abroad, Harriet greeted him with a calm he didn't recognize. Do you have a few minutes? She asked. He dropped his suitcase, tired. What's wrong? I want to talk about the baby. The baby? You already know, Brian. I'm 7 months along. I know. I've just been so busy lately. She smiled faintly. I'm not blaming you. I want to ask when our baby is born. Where will you be? With you, of course. Are you sure? Because that's the same day your company's conference in Singapore begins. I'll make it work. Like always? He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. Don't promise. I need you to know I'm not afraid of motherhood. I'm afraid of our child growing up with a father who's never home. He said nothing. She turned away and walked upstairs. Her footsteps echoed on the stairs, steady and final, like the count of something breaking. By month 8, her doctor told her to rest. She didn't. Work was the only thing keeping her from feeling hollow. Every morning, she walked to the beach, photographed the sunrise, and sent the pictures to Brian not for him to reply, but to remind him there were things more beautiful than profit charts. Then Eleanor came to Malibu. She didn't knock, just walked in, as if she owned the place. Brian's not coming home, Harriet. Don't expect him. Harriet stood, her tone even. I'm not expecting him. I'm just waiting to know I don't have to wait anymore. Eleanor smiled thinly. My son has the whole world in his hands. Who do you think you are? The woman he lost while thinking he owned the world. Eleanor sighed. Women like you are only strong while they're young. When your child is born, you'll need money, insurance, and the Wilson name. Here's some advice: don't cut the rope that keeps you safe. Thank you, Harriet said quietly, but I know how to swim. After Eleanor left, Harriet called Brian. No answer. She called again, and again. In Singapore, Brian's phone buzzed on the table. He saw her name, but someone was presenting the contract. He set the phone aside. Just 10 minutes, he thought. But 10 minutes can last a lifetime. At home, Harriet stared at the glowing screen, then at the dark room around her. She felt the first contraction, sharp, sudden, bending her in pain. Tears blurred her vision. She called again. Then again, 70 times. No answer. Only the long, empty tone of distance. She bit her lip, breathed as the doctor had taught her, and shuddered cold down her spine. She called an ambulance. When the door opened, she whispered, "Don't call my husband." On the way to the hospital, the sirens cut through the rain. Raindrops slid down the window like thousands of tears. Harriet clutched her phone, staring at 17 missed calls. No messages. No one is coming. She gave birth to Isabella Grace Chemsley before dawn. Tiny, dark-haired, eyes still closed. When the nurse asked for the father's name, Harriet paused, then left it blank. "This baby carries my name," she said softly. As the first light of morning slipped through the window, Harriet looked at her daughter and smiled, weak but peaceful. "I'm sorry, my love. I hoped for more." The phone lit up Brian calling back. She looked at the screen but didn't answer. Then she typed one final message. "Your daughter was born, but you're no longer her father." An hour later, headlines broke. Harriet Chemsley leaves Wilson Global, launches $10 billion venture, Chemsley Global Expeditions. When Brian returned from Singapore, she was gone. The house was empty except for one photograph on the table, the same one from the Nevada desert, a laughing Paiute child under a blue sky. Beneath it, Harriet had written, "You once said you wanted to sleep without having to explain yourself. I just helped you keep your word." Brian sat down, eyes hollow. Outside, the Malibu waves still crashed against the shore, but inside him, Paradise had cracked, and nothing could ever mend it again. It rained that day in Malibu, the kind of rare, deliberate rain that carries both sorrow and finality. Harriet woke from a restless sleep to the soft blinking of her phone, a reminder for her prenatal checkup that morning. She rubbed her belly, feeling the faint kicks beneath her skin. "Good morning, Isabella," she whispered, her voice trembling, as if speaking to a soul she had not yet met. The house was silent, except for the distant rhythm of waves striking the glass walls. Brian wasn't home. He had flown out the night before, leaving a quick kiss and a promise, "I'll call you when I land." The phone never rang. Harriet sat up, breathing through the dull ache in her back. At first, she thought it was just an early contraction, until the second wave hit, harder, faster. Instinct made her grab her phone, fingers shaking as she pressed his name. Once, twice. The call rang long before slipping to voicemail. Brian's voice came through, calm and distant. "This is Brian Wilson. Please leave a message." "Brian, I think I'm in labor. The contractions are close. It's real this time. It's our baby, please. Pick up." She hung up and tried to breathe like the doctor had taught her. Then another contraction tore through her body. A small scream escaped her lips, tears spilling onto the sheets as rain drummed harder against the windows. Like a frightened heartbeat outside, she called again. A second time, a third, a fourth. Each ring was a plea sent into the void. "Brian, it hurts. Please, answer me." But no one did. When her water broke, she knew she was out of time. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching the phone in her hand. Somewhere across the world, Brian was likely in a glass-walled conference room, a drink in hand, celebrating another contract. He didn't know that the woman who once walked beside him through the desert was now lying on the floor, calling his name between waves of pain. By the 8th call, her voice was barely there. "Brian, please, the baby's coming. I'm scared." Still no answer. She dialed emergency services, gasping, "I'm in labor, Pacific View Villas." The operator asked, "Is anyone with you?" No, no one. From afar came the wail of sirens. While waiting, she kept calling. 10th, 11th, 12th. By the 13th, all she could do was cry. "Where are you, Brian?" It's your baby. It's Isabella. Maybe she wasn't really expecting him anymore. Perhaps she just needed the sound of the ringing to drown out the silence that could have killed her. The door burst open. Paramedics rushed in, lifting her onto the stretcher. Deep breaths, Miss Chemsley. We're taking you to the hospital. My husband. They're trying to reach him. But Brian's phone was still ringing in an empty hotel room in Singapore. As the ambulance sped through the rain, Harriet stared out the window. Water streaked down the glass like falling memories. She remembered the first time they met in the desert. The way he'd said, "Thank you for teaching me to see the world differently." She had believed in that look, believed in that man. Now, through the siren's wail, she knew that look had died somewhere along the way. The delivery room was flooded with sterile white light, cold as if the world had been drained of color. Doctors moved quickly. Harriet gripped the nurse's hand, drenched in sweat. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "No one's leaving you, Harriet. Breathe. Stay with me." Machines beeped. Heartbeats echoed. And in her head, 17 unanswered calls played like a requiem for everything that had gone silent. She dialed one last time. Mid-contraction, voice raw, desperate, almost a scream. "I'm giving birth, Brian. Can you hear me? I'm giving birth to your child." No reply. Only the mechanical voice of voicemail. "Please leave a message." She sobbed. The doctor shouted, "It's time, Harriet." Push. A scream. A gasp. Then a cry. Thin, sharp, pure, slicing through the darkness like light, breaking the ocean's surface. "It's a girl," the doctor said softly. "You did it." Harriet fell back, tears streaming. They placed the baby on her chest, tiny, warm, trembling. Isabella cried once, then quieted. When she heard her mother's heartbeat, Harriet looked at her daughter and smiled weakly. "It's okay, my love. You came into the light even though your father got lost in the dark." The nurse asked gently, "Father's name for the birth record." "Leave it blank," Harriet said. "She carries my name." "Are you sure?" More than ever. When the room emptied, only the two of them remained. Outside, the rain had stopped. Moonlight blurred on the glass like the trace of a tear. Harriet turned on her phone. 17 outgoing calls, none answered. She typed, "I gave birth. Isabella Grace Chemsley. We're both safe. You don't need to come." Then she paused and added, "You once said you owned a $10 billion empire. Now I have one too, but mine doesn't carry your name." She sent it, then quietly switched the phone off. Half an hour later, in Singapore, Brian Wilson woke to his phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. The screen glowed. 17 missed calls. He blinked, opened the message, and for a moment, the blood in his veins froze. Back in Malibu, Harriet held her daughter close. She knew this moment would haunt him forever, not as revenge, but as remembrance, a reminder that some rings, if left unanswered, will echo in a man's head for the rest of his life. She kissed Isabella's forehead. "Sleep now, my love. From today, I've learned how to stand on my own. Tomorrow, the world will know our names." In the quiet, she smiled, tired but radiant, because from this night on, she was no longer Harriet, wife of Brian Wilson. She was Harriet Chemsley, the woman who gave birth to both a child and an empire. On the very same night, night fell over Singapore, and the city shimmered like a river of glass and light. Inside a limousine rolling past the waterfront, Brian Wilson sat motionless, the glow of his phone washing his face pale. On the screen, 17 missed calls, all from one person, Harriet. He pressed play. Her voice faint, trembling filled the car. "Brian, I think I'm in labor." He played the next one, and the next. By the 5th, her voice was ragged, desperate. "Please, Brian, please answer." By the 9th, she was crying, gasping through contractions. "I'm pushing now. Do you hear me? Brian, can you hear me?" The world inside the car collapsed. Every message was a knife. Every breath she took was an accusation. He called her back. The line rang. Then the robotic voice cut in. "The number you have dialed is currently unreachable." No, no, no. His hands shook, his heart pounding. He called the hospital in Malibu. They refused to release information his name wasn't listed as next of kin. He called her assistant. A calm voice answered, "Mrs. Chemsley and her daughter are safe. You don't need to worry." "My daughter?" "Her daughter, Mr. Wilson. Not yours." The line went dead. Brian sat frozen, a tremor running through his body not from cold, but from realization. He had come too late. He opened his email. A message from his lawyer blinked on the screen. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Harriet Chemsley has filed for divorce. Documents attached." Attached was a news release. Harriet Chemsley, the woman behind the sustainable travel revolution, launches. Chemsley Global Expeditions, valued at $10 billion. On the screen is a photo of Harriet holding a baby, her eyes bright, fierce, free. No trace of the fragile woman who once trembled in a dark penthouse. She had stepped out of his shadow completely. Brian leaned back, breath shallow. 17, he whispered. 17 chances to answer. 17 chances to save everything. And he had chosen silence. Now, silence was his hell. He caught the earliest flight to Los Angeles, 15 hours in the air, and he didn't sleep once. Just listened to her voice messages on repeat until her voice sank into his blood. When he arrived at the hospital, she was gone. At the front desk, a note waited for him. "You have no right to be here. We don't belong to you anymore." He drove to the Malibu villa, empty. Her clothes, her cameras, every trace of her gone. Only one thing remained. Their wedding photo is from Santorini, and the glass cracked across his face. Next to it, a folded note. "Don't look for me. Paradise isn't a place. It's a person, and you've already lost her." Brian sank to the floor. In his despair, he called his mother. Eleanor's voice came through, sharp, controlled. "Now you see? I told you. Women like her only destroy." "What did you do?" His voice shook. "What I had to. I told you to focus on Singapore, and you did. Consider this your lesson. She never loved you, Brian. She used you. Stop it." "What?" "Stop talking. You don't know anything. You're the reason I lost everything." He threw the phone against the wall and buried his face in his hands. Outside, the rain began again, and for the first time in years, the man who once controlled empires broke down and cried, not for the money lost, but for missing the one moment in life that truly mattered. News spread through the corporate world like wildfire. Harriet Chemsley, former creative heart of Wilson Global, becomes its biggest rival. Stock prices plunged. Investors called non-stop. Reporters camped outside his office. But Brian didn't care. He just wanted to know where Harriet and their daughter were. He went to her old studio in Santa Monica. The receptionist said she had moved to San Francisco, to the new headquarters of Chemsley Global Expeditions. He drove all night. At dawn, he stood before a glass tower bearing a new logo, a sweeping sea encircling the globe. Her world now, a world without him. He asked to see her. The receptionist replied politely, "Mrs. Chemsley doesn't receive visitors without an appointment. May I ask who's calling?" "I'm her husband." She looked at the system, then back up. "According to our records, Mrs. Chemsley is single." He couldn't move. Security escorted him outside. That night, he sat in his car across the street for hours. Through the glass walls, he saw Harriet walking by, a baby in her arms, asleep against her shoulder. The sight carved through him like a blade. The next morning, headlines praised her, the new face of feminist leadership, the woman who built an empire from ashes. And beside them, his name appeared again, the billionaire who missed his daughter's birth. At Wilson Global's emergency board meeting, one director said bluntly, "We've lost Harriet, the public, the brand, the heart, everything. Without her, this company has no soul." Brian didn't argue. He only said quietly, "If she can build an empire, then let her. We should learn from her, not destroy her." But they didn't listen. They wanted to sue Harriet for poaching clients and using Wilson Global contacts. Eleanor led the charge, eager for revenge. When Brian received the lawsuit paperwork, he tore it up before her. "No one touches her. Are you insane? She took everything from you." "No. She only took back what I never valued enough." Eleanor's eyes flared. "You're defending the woman who ruined our family?" "No. I'm defending the only good thing I ever had." For the first time, he stood against his mother. And for the first time, he understood. Hell wasn't in the headlines or the boardrooms. Hell lived inside him, in the ringing of 17 missed calls that never stopped, day after day. He drove to a small church on the Malibu hillside, the one where Harriet once photographed local children. He sat there all morning. When the priest asked, "Would you like to confess?" Brian whispered, "I don't know if God forgives a man who missed his miracle." That evening, he wrote Harriet a letter. Not an apology, a confession. "I've learned the most incredible truth. Money can buy other people's time, But it can't buy back the time you've already wasted. I'm not asking to win you back. I want to see our daughter, for 1 minute, to tell her father was a fool. He mailed it, without hope. The next day, the postal service confirmed it had been received, but Harriet never replied. Brian left the company, sold his shares, closed the Malibu villa. Then he flew to Africa, to the same places Harriet had once worked: Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana. He told people, "I want to learn how to build things with a soul." He labored with local workers there, learned their language, built schools, and planted trees. Hands that once signed billion-dollar contracts now carried water and mixed cement. He lay in a wooden hut at night, staring at the star-choked sky. And when the wind passed through the trees, he swore he could hear her voice, soft, distant, but clear. Paradise isn't a place. Paradise is a person. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I know that now, Harriet, but paradise doesn't wait forever." New York in October, cold rain. Streets slick with light. Headlights scattered across asphalt like shards of broken glass. Brian Wilson sat by the window in a faded Chelsea penthouse, staring down at the avenue. It had been 6 months since he left Wilson Global. No interviews, no speeches, no headlines. Some said he'd gone mad. Others said he'd awakened. To him, it was simply emptiness. The letters he sent to Harriet still went unanswered. She had become a legend, her face on Time, Forbes, Vogue, the woman who changed global travel. Whenever he saw her name, he thought of that night, the rain, the dim light, her heartbeat breaking between 17 unanswered calls. That morning, his old lawyer called, voice urgent, "You need to come back to New York. It's your mother." Eleanor Wilson, once the queen of Wall Street without a crown, was under investigation. Headlines flared across every outlet. Wilson Global accused of financial fraud and trust fund misuse. Brian said nothing. Inside, there was no shock, only inevitability. He had always known his mother never did anything without an agenda. When he entered the penthouse, it was unchanged white interiors, orchids in crystal vases, immaculate and sterile. Eleanor sat in the living room, with an ivory silk blouse and a teacup steady in her hand, as if nothing had happened. "You came," she said calmly. "You're under investigation," he replied. "A misunderstanding." "Misunderstandings don't erase $200 million from an investment fund, Mother." She set the cup down, her eyes sharp as glass. "Did you come to scold me, or to save me?" "Neither. I came to ask what you did to Harriet." Eleanor's face stilled. "I did what had to be done. She wasn't worthy." "Not worthy of what? Of me? Of the Wilson name. That name doesn't mean anything anymore. It only reminds people of 17 missed calls." Her expression hardened. "You still blame me? Do you think I enjoyed watching you fall apart? I only tried to protect you from women who see nothing but your money. Harriet wasn't like that. You're blind. She's brilliant and ambitious. She used you as a launch pad." "No, Mother. She needed me present, and you made sure I never was." Eleanor rose, trembling. "I built Wilson Global with my own hands. I couldn't let one woman destroy it." "You already did," Brian said quietly. Silence fell, heavy as the rain outside. He stepped forward and threw a folder onto the table. "These are records of the bribes you arranged in Singapore to cut Harriet out of the Nevada project. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Eleanor froze. Shock flickered across her face, before turning to Frost. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for you." "No, Mother. You did it for power. Because you couldn't stand the thought of someone loving me more than you." The words hit her like a blow. She sank into her chair, hands trembling. "Say that again." "I loved Harriet, and you turned me into the kind of man she had to leave." For the first time in his life, Brian saw his mother cry. Gone was the steel queen of Wall Street, only an older woman, small and lonely in the ruins of her own empire. "I was just afraid of losing you," she whispered. "You were all I had, and because of that, you made me lose everything else." She nodded faintly, tears streaking her face. "Maybe I was wrong, but it's too late now, isn't it?" "No, it's not. You still have time if you stop trying to control what isn't yours to keep." The next day, Eleanor Wilson resigned from Wilson Global. Photographers caught her leaving the building, frail, aging, eyes vacant. No entourage, no driver, just silence. Brian saw the photo online. He felt no triumph, only sorrow. That night, news came. She'd suffered a mild stroke. He rushed to the hospital. She lay pale and still, tubes in her arms. When her eyes fluttered open, she rasped, "Brian, I'm sorry." He took her hand. "Don't be sorry, Mother. Just forgive yourself. And Harriet, she doesn't need forgiveness. She's already moved beyond us." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears sliding silently. Her grip weakened. "Find the child. Don't let her grow up thinking her father never existed." Brian bowed his head. "I promise." A month later, Eleanor was gone. Her funeral was quiet, no press, no cameras. Just a handful of old employees and Brian, standing alone with a white bouquet. He wasn't angry anymore. He finally understood that even love, when mixed with fear, can become destruction. Back in her apartment, he found a sealed envelope in a drawer that evening, written on it, "For you, if I'm no longer here." Inside were letters, ones she had written to Harriet, never sent. "I hate you not because you're cruel, but because I see myself in you, a woman who refuses to kneel. I was afraid my son would love you so much, he wouldn't need me anymore. If you're reading this, I was wrong. And if I was wrong, please forgive Brian." Brian read every line, tears dripping onto the paper. He realized, in a twisted way, his mother had been just another wounded woman, someone who never learned how to love without control. Days later, he tried Harriet's old number. Disconnected. He sent an email, no reply. Then one morning, a message appeared. Not from her, but from her assistant, Julia. "Mrs. Chemsley is in Kenya. If you genuinely want to speak to her, go there. But don't come as a CEO, come as a man." He closed his laptop without hesitation. 18 hours in the air, across oceans and clouds, into the heart of the continent she once called home. He landed in Nairobi, then drove half a day across dirt roads under an endless sky. Red dust, blue horizon, the scent of wild grass. When the jeep stopped, he saw a small village between acacia trees. Children ran barefoot through the fields. In the distance stood a new eco-lodge, wood, stone, soft, golden light. A man approached, skin sun-darkened, voice calm. "Mr. Wilson?" "Yes, I'm James Sterling, Mrs. Chemsley's environmental advisor. I'd like to see her." James studied him for a moment. "I don't know if she'll want to see you, but I'll tell her you're here." That evening, she came. Harriet Chemsley, the same woman, yet not the same, graceful, grounded, glowing like the sunset over red earth. In her arms, a small girl, Isabella, maybe 3 years old. Brian froze. The world went silent. He wanted to step closer, but his legs refused. Harriet stopped a few feet away. Her eyes held no anger now, only calm. "So, you came. I promised I would." "Why?" "Brian, to meet my daughter." She nodded and set Isabella down. The child looked up, curious. "Mama, who's that?" Harriet smiled faintly. "Someone who got lost." Brian knelt, tears brimming. "Hello, sweetheart." Isabella tilted her head. "Daddy." He couldn't speak. He just nodded. The little girl giggled and took his hand. Harriet turned away, gazing at the horizon. The wind brushed her hair, carrying the scent of dry grass. And Sunday, from behind her, Brian said softly, "Thank you for not teaching her to hate me." "I didn't teach her to hate anyone," Harriet replied. "I taught her that people make mistakes, but can still learn to improve." He stepped beside her. "I'm learning. Then I hope, this time, you don't stop halfway." The Kenyan sky burned crimson. There, amid the vastness, stood a man who had lost everything, a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, and a child who carried both their eyes. Perhaps paradise was opening one small door again, not for return, but for forgiveness. Dawn in Kenya wasn't like any sunrise Brian had ever known. It wasn't loud or triumphant like the city's glare, but slow, steady like breathing. Birdsong carried through the air, the scent of wet soil lingered, and the wind moved gently through the tall grass. He stood on the porch of a small wooden house in the same village where Harriet had once lived for years. Far away, mist curled around the mountains. Closer, children ran barefoot toward the school, the one he was helping rebuild. Harriet had allowed him to stay, but under clear terms. "You live in the village, not in the resort. You don't involve yourself in my work. Unless I say you can, don't interfere in Isabella's life." He agreed to all of it. No bargaining. He carried bricks with the local workers, mixed cement, and raised walls that morning. Sweat soaked through his shirt. Hands that once signed billion-dollar deals were now caked with mud. During a break, A small boy asked him in Swahili, "Are you American?" Brian nodded. "Americans don't do hard work." He smiled. "Well, now one of them does." The group burst out laughing and went back to work. Days passed. He learned the local language, learned to plant trees, and learned to listen. Every afternoon, he saw Harriet walking across the fields with Isabella. They didn't speak, just exchanged brief nods before Harriet took the girl toward the resort. He never followed, never pushed closer. He just watched quietly. Once, Isabella tripped and fell. From afar, his heart stopped. But before he could move, Harriet lifted the child, brushed off the dust, smiled, and let her walk again. In that moment, Brian understood Harriet didn't need saving. She just needed him to be there, not to fix or overshadow, to exist beside her world without breaking it. At night, he sat by the fire, and the village children gathered around. He told stories not of business, but of mistakes. "I once had everything," he said, "and lost it because I didn't know what truly mattered." A boy asked, "Do you know now?" Brian looked into the fire. "Yes, what matters most is staying." Seasons changed. The rains came and went. He became part of the village. People called him Z Brian, gentle old Brian. He taught English to the children and helped the adults balance accounts for the local market. Harriet still kept her distance, but sometimes, when Isabella ran across the field shouting, "Daddy Brian," he saw Harriet smile. That was the first time he cried in years, quietly, so no one would see. It wasn't the cry of forgiveness, but of beginning. One afternoon, Harriet visited the school where he taught. She stood at the door, watching. Brian sat on the floor, surrounded by children, telling a story. "Once," he said, "there was a rich man who thought happiness lived in tall buildings and expensive cars. But one day, he lost his paradise and had to travel halfway around the world to find himself." The children clapped. Harriet's eyes softened. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about himself. When class ended, she walked in. He stood, wiping his hands. "Picking up Isabella?" he asked. "And you're a teacher now?" "No, just a storyteller. A sad one, a true one." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Harriet said quietly, "You've changed." "No," he replied. "I've just become the man I should have been all along." She looked at him, her gaze mixed with caution and something gentler. "You know, I once thought I'd never forgive you, but now, I'm not angry anymore. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying the anger." "You don't have to forgive me," Brian said. "Just let me keep being here." "How long do you plan to stay?" "Until Isabella grows up, or until you tell me to leave." Harriet laughed softly, light as the wind. "I'll remember that." That night, they sat together by the fire, Isabella between them. She talked about her day at school, a baby elephant James Sterling was rescuing, and a new Swahili song she'd learned. Her small hands held both of theirs, unaware of the distance that still stretched between them, only knowing that, for once, both her parents were there. When Isabella fell asleep, Harriet stared into the flames. "You once asked me where paradise is," she murmured. "Do you know now?" "Yes." "Where?" "In every day I stop running." She was quiet for a long time, then said, "If you really mean to stay, don't live just to make up for what you did. Live because you believe you can still create something good." "I will," he said. "I'm not promising you anything, Brian. I'm just watching. That's enough. Because this time, I didn't come for forgiveness. I came to stay." Harriet stood, meeting his eyes one last time before walking away. In the glow of the fire, her eyes reflected his face, no longer the man who had shattered her, but someone ordinary, rebuilding quietly. When her silhouette disappeared beyond the trees, Brian looked up at the star-filled sky. The wind moved through the grass, warm, gentle. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost anymore. The dry season in Tanzania had turned the plains to gold. The grass crackled underfoot. The sky was a clear, endless blue, and herds of antelope rippled across the land like waves of moving earth. Every morning began the same way, drums echoing from the village school, calling the children to class. Isabella ran ahead, her little backpack bouncing, while Brian followed behind, holding her water bottle and a straw hat. "Daddy, hurry up," she shouted, laughter ringing. "You go on, sweetheart," he said, panting. "Your dad's not as young as you anymore." Isabella giggled, grabbed his hand, and pulled him along. It had been 3 months since Harriet agreed to let him stay. Every morning, he walked Isabella to school, taught English to the village children, and in the afternoons, they planted trees or carved wooden toys together. No phone, no meetings, no luxury cars, just laughter, the scent of soil, and the sound of their mismatched Swahili songs. One day, Isabella asked, "Daddy, what did you do in America?" Brian smiled. "I built hotels." "What's a hotel?" "It's a place people go to rest." "Did you rest?" He paused. "No. I forgot how." "Do you remember now?" "Yes, because you remind me." Her questions were like tiny stitches, slowly sewing his heart back together. Every smile of hers erased a piece of guilt. He didn't need Harriet's words, only her quiet trust that he could be near their daughter again. One afternoon, Harriet came to the school. She wore a white linen shirt, her hair tied high, sun glinting in her eyes. The children ran to her, shouting, "Mama Harriet." From the porch, Brian watched as she spoke to the teachers. When she turned and caught his gaze, she didn't look away. "Teaching her to sing?" she asked. "Yeah. It's called You Are My Sunshine." Harriet smiled faintly. A surprisingly good choice. Together, they watched Isabella stand in the middle of her classmates, waving her hands, singing off-key but full of joy. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The wind carried her voice across the grass, soft as breath. When the song ended, Harriet said quietly, "You know, I used to be afraid she'd grow up not knowing who her father was. And now I know she knows. Not because I told her, but because you stayed." Those words meant more to him than any contract he'd ever signed. That evening, he walked Isabella home to the resort. Harriet waited at the doorway, watching them laugh together. For the first time, she invited him inside for dinner. No candles, champagne, just rice, grilled fish, and lemon water. "I think she needs to see her father at the table," Harriet said evenly. "But just dinner. Don't get the wrong idea." "I wouldn't dare," he said, smiling. It was a simple meal. Ordinary. Perfect. Isabella talked about school, mixing 3 languages at once, laughing until she hiccuped. Harriet caught herself watching Brian, the man who once broke her, now carefully deboning fish for their daughter, pouring her water, listening to every word. No apologies, no promises, just presence. When Isabella went to bed, Harriet stood on the balcony while Brian cleared the dishes. Moonlight spilled through the palm leaves, silver and soft. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "Thank you for being here," she replied. Silence stretched comfortable this time. Then Harriet said quietly, "Don't let guilt become your burden. Let it become your grace. You're giving her something priceless, your time." July came the season of migration. The sky filled with dark ribbons of birds, like handwriting from the gods. At the Chemsley resort, they hosted a cultural week for the community, and Brian was asked to lead the children's performance. Harriet was stunned to see him on the open-air stage, wearing an earth-colored robe, dancing and singing with the kids. Isabella sat on his shoulders, laughing, while the crowd clapped in rhythm. When the performance ended, she walked over. "You did well," she said softly. "I just followed the teacher's instructions." "That," she said with a smile, "surprised me most." They both laughed, an easy, unguarded sound. Something in Harriet's eyes had shifted, not forgiveness, but recognition. That night, they sat together outside the wooden house, Isabella asleep in Harriet's arms. The full moon hung high. Brian said quietly, "I used to think being a father meant teaching your child everything. Now I realize it means letting them teach you." "Teach you what?" she asked. "How to listen, how to be patient, how to love without owning." Harriet looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Now I understand why Isabella could never hate you." She laid the child down on a small bed, then returned to sit beside him. "Do you remember the day I gave birth?" Brian lowered his head. "I've never forgotten a single second of it. I used to think if you had just walked through that hospital door, just once, I would have forgiven everything. But you didn't." "I know," he said quietly, "and I've lived with that moment every night since." "Does it still haunt you?" "Yes, but not as much as hearing her call me Daddy for the first time." Harriet's lips pressed together, her eyes softened just slightly like the first crack in thick ice. "When will you leave?" she asked. "When you and she don't need me anymore." "Careful with that answer," she said with a faint smile. "I might keep you longer than you expect." They both laughed, light, real. The wind carried the scent of earth and wildflowers. Harriet leaned back, closing her eyes. "Strange," she murmured. For the first time in years, I feel at peace. With you here. So do I, he said. They fell silent. In the distance, tribal drums beat slow and steady like the land's heartbeat. Harriet opened her eyes, gazing at the stars. Maybe, she said softly, we all need to learn how to stay. Not just with each other, but with ourselves. Brian nodded, voice thick. For the first time in my life, I think I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The moon drifted higher. Below it, two people who had once lost everything sat together in the same frame, not as husband and wife, but as two souls who had learned to love the world again through the eyes of their child. November, the dry season. Kenya's sky stretched impossibly high and bright, flocks of birds tracing familiar memories across the blue. Harriet sat on the veranda of the main Chemsley villa, her laptop open, spreadsheets scrolling endlessly. 17 projects are active, 4 are expanding, and 2 are delayed. She was still the woman of big decisions and sharp precision, but lately, someone had begun to break her focus. Isabella now spent whole days at the village school Harriet had helped build. Every morning, Brian walked her there, and Harriet found herself noticing he wasn't around in the mornings, and something inside her felt missing, not because she needed him, but because she'd grown used to his presence. She first admitted the truth the night Isabella came down with a fever. Panic seized her. She called the doctor, the nurse, even James Sterling, her longtime colleague and friend. No one answered. Only one person arrived in 10 minutes. Brian. He didn't ask questions, didn't say I told you so. He lifted Isabella into his arms, checked her temperature, cooled her forehead with a wet cloth, and sat by her bed through the night. Harriet sat across from him, watching. She didn't speak, but her heart beat faster than it should. Around 3 in the morning, Isabella finally slept. Brian stepped outside onto the veranda. Harriet followed. Tired? He asked softly. No, she said. Just scared. You're still the strongest person I know. No, she whispered. I just learned to hide fear well. She sat beside him. No walls, no armor, just two people who'd once broken each other, now keeping watch over the same minor miracle. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Every day. Not that, she said. I mean, do you regret staying here? Living this simple life? He looked toward the fields, where moonlight silvered the grass. If I left, I'd become the man who used money to fill silence. Here, I don't have to prove anything. Here, I get to be myself. You taught me that. You think I taught you? No one else could have. Harriet fell silent. His words pulled memories from places she'd long buried, nights in New York filled with arguments, when he spoke only through numbers and she through pain. Now, in the quiet wild, they spoke through silence. After a while, she said, You know, for years I told myself I'd moved on from you, but the truth is, I just buried you under layers of work. Now that it's quiet again, you've come back. Brian turned to her, his voice warm but steady. Don't remember me as the man you lost. See me as the man sitting next to you now. She looked down at his hands, calloused, sun-browned, human. I'm trying, she whispered. They stayed until dawn. When Isabella woke and saw them still sitting there, she laughed. Did you two fall asleep outside? Harriet smiled. Maybe we just forgot the night was over. The next storm came without warning. An urgent email arrived Monday morning. One of Chemsley's largest resorts in Indonesia had been hit by a landslide after torrential rain. Dozens of staff are trapped. The site is badly damaged. Headlines spread fast. Eco-luxury queen faces environmental scandal. Did Chemsley Expeditions ignore safety warnings? Her heart clinched. The press circled like vultures. For the first time in years, she felt her breath stumble. Brian entered her office and found her surrounded by maps and reports, shaking hands. What happened? Disaster. If we don't respond right, I could lose everything. What do you need? I don't know. Just stay. He sat down beside her. No hesitation, combing through data and footage. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He understood her world now. It's the rain, she said, but they'll claim I ignored the risk. I can't let the company's name drown in this. Then we go there, he said. Are you crazy? It's still dangerous. Exactly why you have to go. Not through a screen. People believe what they see. Let them see that Harriet Chemsley doesn't hide. She stared at him, angry, afraid, but knowing he was right. You'll come with me? You think I'd let you face it alone? They flew out within hours. The journey was long and grueling. When they arrived, Destruction stretched before them, mud, debris, shattered buildings half submerged. But Harriet didn't flinch. She rolled up her sleeves, waded into the muck, spoke with her workers, comforted them, then faced the cameras herself. Her voice trembled under the harsh lights. Brian's hand rested gently on her shoulder, silent, steady. He didn't need to say a word. He was there. Her speech spread around the world. We take responsibility, not through statements but through action. A week later, Chemsley's stock rebounded. Headlines shifted. The woman who owned her mistakes. Harriet Chemsley. Strength in vulnerability. That night, rain fell again along the coast. In their small temporary room by the shore, Harriet watched the storm through the window. Brian handed her a cup of tea. "I remember the first time I met you," he said quietly. "You stood in the desert and told me, if you can't build this world the right way, don't build it at all." Harriet smiled faintly. "She's still here, just a little more tired, but more beautiful than ever." She looked up, meeting his gaze. No pleading, no regret, only understanding. "Brian, yes? Don't say anything. Sit here." He nodded, and they did. Outside, the rain whispered. Two people who had once broken each other sat in quiet warmth. No one knew if this was a beginning or simply a pause between storms, but Harriet knew one thing for sure. The heart she thought she had locked away forever was beating again, slowly, cautiously, but truly. After the landslide in Indonesia, Harriet and Brian returned to Kenya. Everything looked the same: the fields, the sky, the village school, and Isabella's laughter every morning. But something inside Harriet had changed. She no longer startled when Brian entered the room. He no longer built invisible walls when he looked at her. And at night, when she heard his gentle voice reading to Isabella, she saw his calm eyes glowing in the lantern light, and she felt her heart soften. It was as if the three of them had become a family again, even if no one dared to say it out loud. One afternoon, Harriet walked to the riverbank, where they often went to watch antelopes drink. Brian was teaching Isabella how to skip stones. She watched how he laughed, and their daughter's giggles rippled across the water. And she realized what she had once loved about him was still there, not the power, wealth, but the quiet light in him when he smiled at the world. Isabella ran up, clutching Harriet's hand. "Mom," Daddy said, "if I get 3 skips, I get a wish." "And what's your wish?" "That you and Daddy never go away again." Harriet froze. Brian, too, fell silent before pulling their daughter close. "That's a big wish," he said. "But I believe," Isabella whispered, "if you believe really hard, it can come true." That evening, they had dinner together. The wind brushed through the veranda, and the lantern flickered softly. Harriet poured a little wine, something she rarely did anymore. Brian sat across from her, smiling quietly. "Do you remember Santorini?" she asked. "I do. I thought I was marrying a man who'd travel the world with me that day. I didn't know I'd have to travel alone to find myself. And I thought I was marrying someone who'd stand still beside me," he said. "But you made me learn how to run." They both laughed. After a while, Harriet spoke softly. "I don't know if I can love again, Brian. I'm not asking you to," he said. "I just hope that with each passing day, you'll be less afraid of me being here. And if one day I'm not afraid anymore, then I'll be right here, ready, not asking, not pushing, just waiting." She looked at him, the lamplight tracing his sun-warmed face, his honest eyes. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said. "I just need you to stay." "I already have, Harriet." That night, they sat together for a long time. No kisses, no promises. There was only silence between the two people who had completed the full circle of losing and returning. In the distance, drums echoed from the village, and children's songs floated through the dusk. And Harriet understood love isn't about beginning again. It's about daring to stay when your heart still trembles. A year later, Chemsley Global opened a new wildlife sanctuary with Brian in charge. He was no longer Mr. Wilson. No suits, no magazine covers. He wore linen shirts and leather sandals, taught children to plant trees, and guided travelers through the ethics of sustainable travel. Harriet no longer doubted him. Sometimes she traveled for work, leaving him and Isabella at home. When she returned, she often found them asleep together on the porch, Isabella curled against his chest, and she would smile. Peace, the thing she thought she'd lost forever, was now within reach. One morning, sunlight streaming through the window, Isabella ran into her room shouting, "Mom, Daddy's planting a tree for your wedding day." Harriet blinked. What wedding day? The day you got married in Santorini. Daddy said it was the day with the most beautiful light. She stepped outside. Brian was kneeling in the garden, pressing a small sapling into the soil. What are you doing? She asked. He looked up, smiling. I thought, instead of flowers or rings, we could have a tree, something that grows with her. I thought you didn't believe in anniversaries. I don't believe in promises. I believe in things that take root. Harriet watched the tender green leaves flutter in the wind. I'll help you take care of it, she said. Then I'll have a reason never to leave. Time passed. The tree grew. Each year, they planted another beside it. Eventually, behind their small wooden house, a whole grove took shape, the garden of second chances. The locals began calling it the garden where love learns to stay. One sunset, Harriet walked there with Isabella, pointing at each tree. This one we planted when you turned 4. This one, when your father helped me rebuild the resort, and that one when your father and I stopped being afraid of each other. Isabella tilted her head. Mom, are you two in love yet? Harriet smiled, eyes reflecting the crimson sky. Maybe we don't need to call it that anymore. Maybe it just is. That night, after Isabella was asleep, Brian and Harriet sat on the porch. He placed a small box on the table. Inside was a silver necklace, the pendant shaped like a leaf, engraved with the words, "We came back home." Harriet looked up. You call this place home? No, he said softly. I call you and her home. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, I forgive you, Brian. He took her hand gently. No, Harriet, forgive us, because we both got it wrong. She nodded. Outside, the Kenyan wind moved through the trees, the rustling leaves sounding like a lullaby. Somewhere in the distance, the tribal drums began again, a rhythm of hearts breathing in unison. Harriet leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think our ending was silence, she said. But maybe, he murmured. Silence is how love comes back, not loud, not bright, just quiet enough to hear our hearts beat together. They stayed like that until sunrise. A new chapter began, not written in tears, but in peace. And if you've listened here, thank you. Honestly, this story wasn't just about Harriet and Brian. It was about us, the ones who've loved wrong, hurt deeply, lost our way, and somehow learned to come home to ourselves. If you saw a part of yourself in this story, comment. I'd love to hear what it meant to you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because more stories of love, loss, and light are still waiting. Thank you for walking through all 10 chapters. I'll see you in the next story, where maybe someone else will find their own sunrise.